A thug ripped a royal guard's crucifix, mocking his faith in front of the crowd. But seconds later, he found himself on his knees, praying for mercy. Here's what happened. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Also, make sure to check out our second channel, Guard Patrol, linked in the pinned comments, because we upload daily at the same time on both channels. So, subscribe to both and never miss a powerful story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered to witness the ceremonial changing of the guard. Among the sea of visitors stood Guard Daniel Matthews, his scarlet uniform immaculate, his posture a testament to years of military discipline. The bearskin cap sat perfectly atop his head, adding to his imposing figure as he stood at his post, eyes forward, expression neutral. Beneath the high collar of his uniform, barely visible to those who weren't looking for it, hung a small silver crucifix on a thin chain. A personal item normally hidden, but today catching occasional glints of sunlight. 30 feet away, Marcus Harlow pushed through the crowd with deliberate roughness, his muscular frame adorned with faded tattoos that crawled up his neck and disappeared beneath his sleeveless shirt. Dark eyes scanned the scene with contempt, settling finally on the motionless guard. A sneer formed on his lips as he nudged his companion, a wiry man who seemed perpetually nervous in Marcus's presence. "Look at him," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "standing there like he's made of stone. Bet he thinks he's something special." His companion nodded quickly, eyes darting around as if searching for escape routes. "Maybe we should just take our pictures and go, yeah? Place is crawling with security." Marcus ignored him, moving closer to the guard, studying him with the calculated intensity of a predator. "Nah, I want to see what makes these guys tick. Everyone's got a breaking point." A family with 2 young children stepped back as Marcus approached, the mother pulling her curious daughter closer to her side. A group of elderly tourists lowered their cameras, sensing the shift in atmosphere that accompanied Marcus's movements. The air itself seemed to grow heavier as he positioned himself directly in the guard's line of sight. "Hey, toy soldier!" Marcus called out, his London accent thick with mockery. "Must be boring, yeah? Standing here all day while the world goes by?" He circled closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "Or do you actually believe all this means something?" Guard Matthews remained motionless, his training allowing him to see Marcus without appearing to look at him. 8 years of military service had taught him to assess threats while maintaining his bearing. The man approaching him displayed all the classic signs of someone looking for trouble: the aggressive stance, the deliberate provocations, the need for an audience. "Not much of a talker, are you?" Marcus stepped closer, invading the invisible boundary that most respectful tourists maintained. "Or maybe you're just not allowed to think for yourself anymore. They train that out of you, do they?" A glint of silver caught Marcus's attention, the crucifix at the guard's neck, momentarily visible as a gentle breeze moved the fabric of his uniform collar. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his mouth twisting into a new, more targeted kind of contempt. "Well, would you look at that," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "A true believer, eh? Got yourself a little magic charm to keep you safe?" He tapped his own chest mockingly. "Let me guess. Mummy gave you that before you went off to play soldier." An elderly man wearing a clerical collar paused nearby, his concerned gaze moving between the aggressive visitor and the stoic guard. He clutched his worn Bible closer to his chest, recognition dawning in his eyes. He'd seen this type of confrontation before, the deliberate targeting of faith. "Faith is for the weak," Marcus continued, raising his voice to ensure others could hear him, "for people who can't face reality without some fantasy to hide behind." He spread his arms wide, addressing the growing circle of onlookers. "Look at him. Can't even defend himself or his imaginary friend." The guard remained perfectly still, his disciplined stance unwavering. Only those with military training might have noticed the subtle tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his already perfect posture. The crucifix at his neck caught another ray of sunlight, as if in defiance of the words being hurled at its wearer. "I spent 3 years in prison," Marcus announced, moving close enough now that his breath could be felt. "Prayed every night for the first month. Know what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." His voice took on a harder edge. "That's when I realized. Hope is for cowards and fools. There's no one listening, soldier boy. No one up there looking out for any of us." The crowd had grown silent, uncomfortable with the display, but unable to look away. Children were being ushered to the edges, parents covering their ears against Marcus's increasingly explicit language. Yet Guard Matthews remained a statue, his eyes fixed forward, his duty unchanged by the storm brewing before him. "You know what I think?" Marcus circled the guard like a shark, each rotation bringing him closer. "I think you wear that cross because you're scared. Scared of dying in some desert for a country that doesn't give a damn about you." He tapped his temple. "Smart move, really. Convince yourself there's something waiting after all this. Makes it easier to stand in the line of fire, doesn't it?" The guard's eyes remained forward, his breathing measured and controlled. Sweat beaded at his temples, but whether from the afternoon heat or the extreme discipline required to maintain his composure, no one could tell. "Did you wear it in Afghanistan?" Marcus pressed, correctly guessing the guard had seen combat from the campaign ribbon barely visible on his chest. "Did you clutch it while your mates were getting blown to bits? Did it save any of them?" His voice grew louder, more aggressive. "Or did your god sit back and watch the show?" A young couple moved away, the woman whispering something about finding security. Two military veterans, their service evident in their bearing despite their civilian clothes, shifted closer, exchanging concerned glances as they assessed the escalating situation. "The Bible says, 'Thou shalt not kill,' right?" Marcus's laugh was harsh, devoid of humour. "But that's exactly what they trained you to do, isn't it? How many did you take out while wearing that little charm? 10, 20. Does God give soldiers a special pass when it comes to the commandments?" The elderly chaplain had positioned himself where the guard could see him, his presence offering silent support. He'd served as a military chaplain for decades, had stood beside men as they reconciled faith with duty, had buried those who couldn't return home. His eyes met the guard's for the briefest moment, a flash of understanding passing between them. "Nothing to say?" Marcus stepped even closer, his face inches from the guard's. "Your God struck people down for less than what I'm saying. Where's the lightning bolt, eh?" He snapped his fingers near the guard's ear. "Maybe he's busy, got his hands full with famines and wars. Or maybe," his voice dropped to a theatrical whisper, "he's just not there at all." The guard's jawline tightened almost imperceptibly. His training had prepared him for tourists testing his resolve, for drunks seeking reaction, even for potential threats to the palace. But this deliberate assault on something so personal, the small silver cross that had been his brother's, cut deeper than physical intimidation ever could. "I grew up with the nuns," Marcus continued, sensing he might have found a pressure point. "St. Catherine's Home for Boys. Know what they taught me?" He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "That faith would protect me, that God watches over children. That was right before Father Keegan decided I needed special attention after evening prayers." A mother pulled her curious children further back, covering the youngest's ears. The veterans had moved closer now, their stance casual but their eyes alert, recognizing the signs of a situation about to boil over. "So, I learned young," Marcus's voice rose again, deliberately provocative. "God doesn't answer prayers, doesn't protect the innocent, doesn't do anything but give people like you an excuse to feel superior while you blindly follow orders." He gestured to the palace behind them. "Standing guard over what? Some old buildings and the leftovers of an empire, and you think that's noble because some priest told you so?" The guard remained motionless, but something had changed in his bearing, not a movement, not even a flinch, but a quality of stillness that felt different. Those who had been watching closely might have noticed his knuckles whitening slightly on his ceremonial rifle, the subtle shift of weight from one foot to another. "I see you in church every Sunday," Marcus mimicked a pious voice, hands pressed together in mock prayer. Head bowed, begging forgiveness for the people you've killed, the lives you've ruined, all while wearing that uniform. He spat on the ground near the guard's polished boots. "Hypocrite!" A small girl, perhaps 7 years old, tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why is that man saying mean things about God?" Her innocent question carried in the tense silence, causing several onlookers to exchange uncomfortable glances. "Because he's a very unhappy person, sweetheart," the father replied, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Some people blame God for things that people did to them." Marcus's head whipped around, his eyes narrowing on the father. "You don't know the first thing about me, mate. Keep your amateur psychology to yourself." "I know a man in pain when I see one," the father replied calmly, positioning himself between Marcus and his daughter. "And I know it doesn't give you the right to inflict it on others." Marcus laughed, but there was a hollow quality to it. Big words from a man hiding behind a child. He turned back to the guard, whose expression remained unchanged despite the escalating tension. "See that? Another true believer. Probably tells his kids that God will protect them too." He stepped even closer to the guard, close enough that protocol would normally permit intervention. "Will your God protect you if I decide to really test your famous discipline?" "Our Father, who art in heaven," Marcus began in a sing-song voice, making an exaggerated sign of the cross. "Tell me, soldier boy, do you actually believe that garbage, that there's some bearded man sitting on a cloud, keeping score of your good deeds?" He circled again, each rotation bringing him closer to the guard's personal space. "Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, except when it's inconvenient, right?" The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, but something shifted in his breathing pattern, a slight irregularity that only a trained observer might notice. The silver crucifix at his neck seemed to catch more light now, as if deliberately making its presence known despite Marcus's mockery. "Give us this day our daily bread," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a nastier edge. "That's the real hook, isn't it? Promise people rewards if they follow the rules, keep them in line with stories about paradise." He leaned in, deliberately provocative. "Did they promise you a special place in heaven for standing here like a statue? Extra points for not punching me in my face right now?" The elderly chaplain had moved closer, his worn Bible held against his chest like armor. "Young man," he began, his voice carrying the calm authority of decades in service, "there are children present. Perhaps you could mind your own business, Padre," Marcus snapped without turning, his eyes never leaving the guard. "Unless you want to explain why your God lets children starve while priests live in palaces." The chaplain didn't retreat. "The same reason he allows you the freedom to speak, as you do now. Free will comes with responsibilities few choose to honour." This drew Marcus's attention momentarily. He turned, sizing up the chaplain with contempt. "Free will? That's your defence? God could stop suffering but chooses not to because freedom?" He barked a harsh laugh. "If that's the best you've got, no wonder churches are emptying faster than pubs at closing time." A young mother guided her curious children several steps backward. "Let's go see the palace from another angle," she suggested, her voice deliberately bright despite the concern in her eyes. "Running away," Marcus called after them. "Better hurry. Wouldn't want your kids to hear the truth about their imaginary friend in the sky." He turned back to the guard, whose expression remained carved from stone despite the escalating assault. "See? They start the brainwashing young. Get them before they can think critically." The guard's crucifix had become more visible now as the wind occasionally shifted his high collar. Each time it caught the light, Marcus's eyes narrowed, his focus becoming more targeted. "Forgive us our trespasses," he continued the mocking prayer, stepping even closer. "That's the real seller, isn't it? Do whatever you want, hurt whoever you want, then mumble some magic words and poof, all forgiven." He gestured toward the guard's ceremonial rifle. "How many people have you shot with that thing? Or do they give you something less ceremonial when they need real killing done?" The veterans exchanged looks, recognizing the dangerous territory this was entering. Professional soldiers understood the burden of combat decisions, the complex reconciliation of duty with faith. This wasn't just disrespect anymore, it was deliberately targeting something deeply personal. "And lead us not into temptation," Marcus pressed on, his voice growing louder. "But I'm tempting you right now, aren't I, soldier? Tempting you to break that famous discipline, to show everyone here that underneath all that ceremony you're just another man with a short fuse." A child's voice piped up from the edge of the gathering crowd. "Mummy, why is the angry man talking about God that way?" The innocent question hung in the air, making several onlookers shift uncomfortably. "Because some people are hurting inside," the mother responded quietly, but loud enough to carry. "And when people hurt, sometimes they want others to hurt too." Marcus spun toward the voice. "Save your amateur psychology, lady. You don't know the first thing about me." "I know enough," she replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I work with troubled youth. I recognize pain disguised as anger when I see it." "Pain." Marcus spat the word like poison. "You think this is about pain? This is about truth. The truth that religion is nothing but a control mechanism, a fairy tale for adults too scared to face reality." He turned back to the guard, whose eyes remained fixed forward despite the commotion. "Your friend on the cross, what was his big message? Turn the other cheek." The guard's discipline held firm, but those watching closely might have noticed a subtle tightening around his eyes, a nearly imperceptible flex of muscle in his jaw. "Well, you're certainly turning the other cheek now, aren't you?" Marcus laughed harshly. "Standing there, taking it like a good little soldier, while I tell you exactly what your faith is worth." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a lighter. "You know, in prison the religious boys would get so worked up if you even threatened their precious Bibles. Wonder if the same applies to symbols." The flick of the lighter's flame caused a ripple of tension through the onlookers. Several people reached for phones, understanding that a line was about to be crossed. "What do you think would happen?" Marcus asked, holding the flame uncomfortably close to the guard's uniform. "If your little cross caught fire, would God protect it? Would you finally break character to save it?" A dangerous gleam entered his eyes as they fixed on the silver crucifix now clearly visible against the guard's scarlet uniform. "Or is your duty to Queen and country more important than your duty to God?" The flame from Marcus's lighter danced dangerously close to the guard's immaculate uniform, casting shifting shadows across his stoic features. For a heartbeat, the crowd collectively held their breath, sensing the precarious moment, balancing on a knife's edge. Then, with a theatrical sigh, Marcus snapped the lighter shut. "Too easy," he declared, pocketing the lighter. "Fire would just get me arrested. I want to see what really matters to you, soldier boy." His eyes fixed on the crucifix at the guard's neck, studying it with predatory focus. The silver glinted in the late afternoon sun. Simple, understated, yet clearly worn with significance. Not the flashy ornament of casual faith, but something carried with personal meaning. "That cross," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a contemplative tone, that somehow felt more dangerous than his previous aggression. "You keep looking down at it. Just little glances, but I see them." He moved closer, invading the space that protocol dictated should remain uncrossed. "It means something special, doesn't it? Not just religious garbage, but something personal." The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, but something infinitesimal changed in his bearing, a subtle tension that soldiers might recognize as the shift from ceremonial stillness to combat readiness. His breathing remained controlled, but more deliberate now, as if preparing for what might come. "Let me guess," Marcus continued, circling like a shark that had scented blood. "Gift from Mummy before you shipped out? Or maybe a girlfriend who promised to wait but didn't?" He leaned in, voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "Or is it for some dead mate who bought the propaganda and paid the price?" A muscle twitched in the guard's jaw, a reaction so slight it would have been invisible to anyone not deliberately looking for weakness. But Marcus saw it, and his eyes lit with the satisfaction of a predator confirming vulnerability. "That's it, isn't it?" He pressed harder, recognizing he'd found a pressure point. "Someone who didn't make it back. And you wear that thinking it connects you somehow, that they're watching from some magical kingdom in the clouds." The elderly chaplain stepped forward, sensing dangerous escalation. "Young man, you've made your point. Perhaps it's time to... Time to what, Padre?" Marcus snapped without taking his eyes off the guard. "Time to respect his faith? His personal relationship with an imaginary friend?" His laugh was sharp, brittle. "No, I think it's time we had some truth around here." With snake-like speed, Marcus's hand shot out, fingers wrapping around the small silver crucifix visible at the guard's neck. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Marcus yanked hard, snapping the chain with a vicious jerk. "Let's see how much faith means when it's put to the test," Marcus snarled, holding the crucifix up like a trophy, the broken chain dangling between his fingers. The guard's composure cracked, not completely, but enough that his eyes dropped to follow the sacred object, now clutched in Marcus's fist. For the first time, emotion flickered across his face. Not anger, but something deeper, more primal. The look of a man watching something irreplaceable being threatened. "Give it back!" a woman from the crowd demanded, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. "That's his personal property." Marcus ignored her, examining the crucifix with theatrical scrutiny. "Doesn't look special. No magical powers that I can see." He dangled it mockingly. "Just a bit of silver shaped like a torture device. Strange thing to worship when you think about it." He turned toward the crowd, playing to his unwilling audience. "See this? This is what he believes will save him. This is what he thinks gives meaning to standing here day after day like a statue." He held it higher. "This is what delusion looks like." The guard's eyes tracked the crucifix, though his body remained at attention, duty warring visibly with personal violation. His ceremonial rifle remained perfectly positioned, his stance textbook perfect, but something had fundamentally changed in his bearing. The man behind the uniform was now visible, bleeding through the cracks of protocol. "I wonder," Marcus said, voice dripping with malice, "what would happen if I just..." He made as if to throw the crucifix into the crowd, then stopped, laughing at the guard's almost imperceptible flinch. "No, too merciful. You might get it back." Instead, he dropped the crucifix to the ground at his feet. The silver cross bounced once on the pavement, landing in a shaft of sunlight where it gleamed like a challenge. "You want it?" Marcus taunted, positioning his heavy boot above the delicate object. "Then move. Break your precious protocol. Show everyone here what matters more, your duty or your delusion." The crowd had gone completely silent, the tension palpable. Parents pulled children behind them. Veterans shifted their weight in preparation, and the chaplain's knuckles whitened around his Bible. "No? Still playing statue?" Marcus pressed his advantage, sensing victory within reach. "Then I guess it doesn't matter that much after all." He began to lower his boot, the heavy sole hovering just inches above the silver crucifix. "Your faith is about to be crushed, soldier boy, just like mine was." That's when he made his final mistake. Looking directly into the guard's eyes, seeking to witness the pain as he destroyed something precious, Marcus spoke his last taunt. "I bet it belonged to someone who died thinking God would protect them. Guess they were wrong, just like your—" The guard moved with such explosive precision that most onlookers didn't register what happened until Marcus was already falling. In one fluid motion, honed through years of combat training, the guard pivoted and executed a perfect leg sweep. His boot connected with Marcus's ankle, collapsing the vulnerable joint with calculated force. Marcus went down hard, a surprised grunt escaping his lips as he crashed to the pavement. His arms windmilled uselessly, finding nothing but air as his centre of gravity betrayed him. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed across the suddenly silent courtyard. Before Marcus could even process his new horizontal position, the guard had secured his ceremonial rifle in its proper position with his left hand, while his right swiftly retrieved the crucifix from the ground. The movement possessed a grace that belied its military efficiency, not just the recovery of an object, but the reclamation of something sacred. With reverence that stood in stark contrast to his precisely violent action moments before, the guard raised the crucifix to his lips, placing a solemn kiss on the silver surface. His eyes closed briefly, a personal moment of reconnection before he returned the sacred object to its place around his neck, tucking it safely beneath his collar. Only then did he address Marcus, who was attempting to struggle to his feet, his face a mask of shock and dawning pain as his ankle registered the damage. "That crucifix," the guard spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations, "belonged to my brother, Lieutenant Thomas Matthews, Royal Marines. He died pulling 3 of his men to safety under enemy fire in Helmand Province." The crowd remained frozen, witnessing something few ever saw. A Queen's Guard breaking protocol, yet somehow maintaining every ounce of the dignity his position represented. This wasn't the theatrical performance tourists sometimes hope to provoke. This was something far more authentic and powerful. In his final letter home, the guard continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face, he wrote that his faith gave him courage when courage was needed most. That in the darkest moments, when fear threatened to overwhelm duty, his faith reminded him of something beyond himself worth fighting for. Marcus had managed to get to one knee, his ankle already swelling visibly beneath his jeans. The swagger had evaporated from his bearing, replaced by the universal vulnerability of someone suddenly finding themselves at a physical disadvantage. Yet his eyes still burned with defiance, refusing to acknowledge the moral chasm that had opened between himself and the guard towering above him. "So that's it," Marcus spat, though his voice lacked its former conviction. "I touch your precious trinket, and suddenly all that discipline goes out the window. Some soldier you are." "There is a difference," the guard replied, his voice level, but carrying easily to every person in the now silent courtyard, "between discipline and submission, between duty and servitude." He adjusted his stance, resuming a more formal position, though not yet returning to his post. "My duty is to the crown, but my duty is also to honour those who served and sacrificed before me." The elderly chaplain had moved closer, standing nearby, not in intervention but in silent support. His presence seemed to add weight to the guard's words, a living bridge between military service and faith. "You speak of faith as weakness," the guard continued, his tone neither angry nor defensive, but carrying the absolute conviction of experience. "Yet faith has sustained soldiers through the worst humanity can offer, from the trenches of the Somme to the deserts of Afghanistan. Faith doesn't promise protection from suffering, it provides purpose within it." A veteran in the crowd nodded almost unconsciously, recognition flashing in his eyes. The guard was expressing something many who had served understood, but few could articulate: the complex relationship between duty, faith, and survival in environments where death is a constant companion. You mock prayer. The guard's eyes remained locked on Marcus, who had finally managed to stand, though he was clearly favouring his injured ankle. Yet I've seen hardened soldiers pray, not from fear, but from the profound understanding that some burdens cannot be carried alone. Marcus's face contorted with a complex mixture of pain, rage, and something deeper, perhaps the first crack in a defensive wall built over years of hurt. "Spare me the sermon," he snarled, but the words lacked their former power. "You attacked me over a piece of metal, assaulted a civilian. Let's see how your superiors feel about that." "I prevented the desecration of a personal religious item," the guard corrected calmly. "An item connected to a fallen serviceman. I used minimum necessary force to prevent its destruction." His gaze swept the crowd briefly, as dozens of witnesses can attest. Several people nodded firmly, phones still recording what had become an unexpected moment of authentic human drama amidst the usual ceremonial pageantry. "Moreover," the guard continued, returning his attention to Marcus, "my action was not in defense of metal, but in defense of meaning. That cross represents not just my faith, but my promise to honor my brother's sacrifice, to strive to be worthy of it, to remember that the freedoms you exercise so carelessly were purchased at tremendous cost." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's face. The dawning realization that he had misjudged not just the situation, but the profound depth of what he had attempted to violate. This wasn't about religion as an abstract concept. This was about the very real human connections it represented. "Your anger," the guard said, his voice softening slightly, "speaks of your own wounds. The chaplain you mocked would tell you that those wounds deserve healing, not infliction upon others." He straightened to his full height. "But while your pain may explain your actions, it does not excuse them." "My brother believed," the guard continued, his voice carrying across the courtyard without needing to be raised, "that faith isn't about hiding from reality, but facing it with courage. That hope isn't for cowards, but for those brave enough to see beyond their immediate circumstances." Marcus shifted his weight, grimacing as his injured ankle protested. His earlier bravado had cracked, revealing glimpses of the wounded man beneath. Yet pride held him upright, refusing to concede the moral high ground. "Pretty words," he spat, though the venom had dimmed, "but they changed nothing. Your brother died believing a lie, just like all the others. Just like you will someday." A ripple of disapproval moved through the gathered crowd, but the guard remained unperturbed by the deliberately cruel statement. Instead, his eyes reflected something unexpected, compassion tinged with profound sorrow. "I've stood watch at the cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday," he said quietly. "I've seen mothers place wreaths for sons who never came home. I've witnessed veterans stand at attention, their bodies broken, but their spirits intact. None of these people were fools or cowards. They simply understood something you refuse to see, that some truths are worth suffering for." The chaplain nodded solemnly, his weathered face reflecting decades of similar conversations with those struggling to reconcile faith with suffering. "The opposite of faith isn't doubt," he added gently. "It's certainty, the kind of rigid certainty that leaves no room for growth or healing." Marcus's laugh was bitter, undercut by the physical pain he was clearly experiencing. "Save the philosophical debate, Padre. Your soldier boy here assaulted me over a trinket. We'll see how his faith holds up in court." "What happened here wasn't about religious zealotry," the guard responded, his composure absolute despite having broken protocol. "It was about human dignity, about respecting boundaries, about understanding that some lines, once crossed, demand response." He adjusted his stance slightly, the movement carrying military precision. "The same principles apply whether one believes in God or not." One of the veterans had stepped forward, his bearing suggesting former military service of significant rank. "Young man," he addressed Marcus firmly, "I've spent 40 years in service, seen combat on 3 continents, and buried more friends than I care to count. Some were believers, some weren't. But I never met one who would tolerate the deliberate desecration of another's memorial to their fallen comrades." The crucifix, now safely returned to its place around the guard's neck, caught the light as he shifted position. "This cross survived 2 tours in Afghanistan," he said, touching it briefly through his uniform. "It was in my hand when I called in medical evacuation for wounded civilians. It was against my heart when I wrote letters to the families of fallen soldiers. It represents not just faith, but a covenant to honour those who served alongside me by how I live each day." Security personnel had finally arrived, alerted by the commotion. 2 uniformed officers approached cautiously, assessing the unusual scene of a royal guard engaged in conversation, while a man nursed what appeared to be an injured ankle. "This man," the guard informed them without preamble, "attempted to destroy personal property of religious and military significance. I prevented that destruction with necessary force." The older security officer nodded, instantly grasping the situation. "We'll take it from here," he said, with the deference one serviceman shows another. "Your duty station remains secure, sir." Marcus's face contorted with frustrated rage as he realized the situation was slipping beyond his control. "He attacked me. Are you just going to take his word over mine? Where's the famous British justice?" "Sir," the younger security officer addressed Marcus firmly, "we have approximately 30 witnesses and at least a dozen video recordings of the incident. If you wish to press charges, you're welcome to do so, though I should warn you that desecration of religious items and harassment of the Queen's Guard carry their own legal consequences." The chaplain stepped forward, his manner suggesting someone accustomed to mediation. Perhaps medical attention for the young man's ankle would be appropriate, followed by a cooling-off period for all involved. Marcus glared at him, but the fight was visibly draining from his posture. "I don't need your Christian charity, old man." "It's not charity," the chaplain replied evenly. "It's basic human decency, something that exists independently of any religious framework." He glanced at the guard, a moment of understanding passing between them. "Though, in my experience, those who rail most aggressively against faith are often those most deeply wounded by its misapplication." The guard's expression softened fractionally. "My brother would say that true faith should heal, not harm, that its purpose is to build, not destroy." His eyes met Marcus's directly. "Whatever experiences led you to such anger, they represent the failure of humans, not of faith itself." For a brief moment, something vulnerable flickered across Marcus's face, a glimpse of the hurt child beneath the aggressive adult. But the window closed as quickly as it had opened, defences slamming back into place. "Save your psychoanalysis," he snarled, though the words lacked their former edge. "I'm not one of your lost sheep looking for a shepherd." "No," the guard agreed quietly. "You're a human being looking for meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it. The same as every other person here." He glanced at the security officers. "I believe these gentlemen need to continue their duties now, as do I." The security personnel moved efficiently, one supporting Marcus as he limped away, the other taking statements from willing witnesses. Despite his continuing stream of protests, Marcus allowed himself to be led from the scene, his earlier aggression deflated by the unexpected turn of events. He threw one final glance over his shoulder, not at the guard, but at the crucifix now safely returned to its place. Something unreadable passed across his features before he disappeared into the crowd. Without ceremony, the guard returned to his post, resuming his position with the same precision that marked all his movements. The transition from human confrontation back to ceremonial duty might have seemed jarring, but there was a seamless quality to it, as if both aspects were equally authentic parts of the same man. The elderly chaplain approached, pausing at a respectful distance. "Your brother would be proud," he said quietly. "Not of the physical action, perhaps, but of the principle behind it." What would you have done in the guard's position? When does defending one's faith and personal values justify breaking protocol and tradition? The line between duty and personal conviction can often blur in moments of crisis, forcing us to prioritize our deepest values. Perhaps the most powerful question this incident raises: how do we respond when something sacred to us, whether religious or deeply personal, is deliberately attacked? Do we maintain composure at all costs? Or is there a time when standing firm requires decisive action? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it too. Your comments about similar experiences or thoughts on where to draw these difficult lines help create a community of thoughtful viewers. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon to never miss our upcoming stories about courage, respect, and standing firm in one's convictions. Check out our other videos appearing on your screen right now, and we'll see you again tomorrow at the same time with another brand new video.